The Legend of Zelda is pound for pound the greatest video game series of all time. And that is a statement I'm confident to make. I wasn't even born when The Legend of Zelda was released in 1986 on the Famicom Disk System in Japan and a year later on the Nintendo Entertainment System. But from the release of the initial game, The Legend of Zelda had a profound impact on the gaming world. Zelda delivered an 8-bit open world filled with odd creatures and puzzles to challenge the player. And yes, it was very challenging. You couldn't just look up how to complete a dungeon because there was no internet at the time. It was simply you and the game and the hours of frustration involved in completing it. The Legend of Zelda is a spawn of the creative minds of Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka. Set in a fantasy land of Hyrule, the plot centers on a boy named Link who must collect the 8 fragments of the Triforce of Wisdom in order to rescue Princess Zelda, who is being held captive by the antagonists of the video game, Ganon. Sounds like a pretty typical Nintendo game, right? We have our odd hero fighting off hordes of weird creatures to save a princess who's been abducted by this hybrid monster. But hey, who cares because the formula works and Miyamoto and Tezuka were able to use it to their advantage to create a unique experience like The Legend of Zelda. In The Legend of Zelda, the player controls Link from a flip screen overhead perspective. You begin the game armed with only a shield, but it's far too dangerous to go alone, so grab a sword and let the adventure begin. In the game, the player must traverse through maze-like dungeons full of monsters to obtain all 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom. What is the Triforce of Wisdom, you may ask? The Triforce is an omnipotent relic that represents the essence of the Golden Goddesses who create the realm of Hyrule. But more on that later. The Triforce is made up of 3 equilateral triangles, which are joined to form a larger equilateral triangle. The 3 distinct triangles are referred to as the Triforce of Power, the Triforce of Wisdom, and the Triforce of Courage. In the Legend of Zelda video game, only 2 Triforces are present, while the Triforce is complete in The Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Speaking of The Adventure of Link, the second game in the series released less than a year after the original Legend of Zelda video game. The Adventure of Link is a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda, and stars Link once again on a quest to save Princess Zelda. The Adventure of Link was quite different from its predecessor though. The game emphasized side-scrolling and role-playing style elements. It also barely resembles the first game in the series. With the side-scrolling action, the game began to resemble Castlevania. Set several years after the events of The Legend of Zelda, we find Link seeking some answers as he discovers a strange mark on the back of his left hand at his encounter with the sleeping Zelda. Not to be confused with the Zelda from the first game, this new Zelda is regarded as the Princess of Hyrule from long ago. Almost seems like our hero is a link to the past. Anyways, Impa tells Link that he is a chosen hero that can save the sleeping Princess Zelda, but in order to do so, Link must find the Triforce of Courage in the Great Palace. After defeating a shadow doppelganger of himself, Link claims the Triforce of Courage and unites all 3 Triforce triangles. Zelda 2 is like the black sheep of the franchise. The side-scrolling perspective was completely different from its predecessor, and the inclusion of an RPG system and magic spells over equip items was a pretty bold decision. Zelda 2 had Miyamoto return as its producer, and Tezuka returned to write the story and script. The game was put together by a different team though, and was directed by Tadashi Sugiyama. Zelda 2 is probably the toughest Zelda game out there. The game constantly tests your skills and reflexes, so if you seek a thrill, this Legend of Zelda game may just be for you. We've only touched on the Zelda titles that launched the franchise on the road to stardom. Stay tuned for part 2 as we look at the Zelda series of the 90s. Thank you for watching.